So first of all, welcome very much to all of you for coming to this conference. I'm Joan MacIver, the Vice Chair of the British Institute for the Study of Iraq. Some of you know my name from the organizing. On behalf of the chair, Dr. Paul Collins, who's here, and Dr. John Curtis, who is coming this evening, our president, and all my fellow trustees, along with Ali Kader, our co-organizer, and the BISI executive officer, I welcome you to this conference and to London. The Institute was the British School of Archaeology in Iraq, established in 1932, with a legacy from Gertrude Bell, and after a wide public appeal from the good and the great of the time, we were established. Through much of its history, it focused on research on archaeology and languages of ancient Iraq. We were based in Iraq until 1991. In 2007, it changed its name to the British Institute for the Study of Iraq to reflect a wish of the trustees to promote research on the modern Iraq and to expand our research focus. We are a self-funded research institute. We are a membership institute, and we are delighted that a number of our members are here with us today. We urge others to join us to support our work. 6 years ago, we held a very successful conference, Gertrude Bell, A Life and Legacy, with the British Academy, at the British Academy, and the publication of that conference was published by the British Academy and Oxford University Press. You too can order the book. We have nothing to do with the profits. We do plan to publish the proceedings of this conference depending on how the papers go and how we all discuss this at the end. And Orit Bashkin will be the main editor of the proceedings. And we welcome thoughts and people to discuss this. That conference led to close ties to the directors of the film Letters from Baghdad on Gertrude Bell, which some of you may have seen. And through them, an introduction to Mr. David Dangour, who is also here with us today. We had the privilege of screening Remember Baghdad here at the British Academy and in Oxford. And you will have the opportunity to see this film tomorrow in the late afternoon at the end of conference day 2. Along with the Q&A with David. In the discussions with him, we raised the idea of this conference and this topic, and after 2 years, it has come to pass. It is over a year ago that many of you submitted your abstracts, and the call for papers had its deadline, and you will see from the program that there's a very wide and varied list of topics and themes, from a range of speakers from early career to established academics, focusing on the story of the Jews of Iraq and Iraq in the modern era with its sort of diverse and rich heritage. We are dealing also with the pain and the difficulties of the experience of this community. We will all be enriched by the opportunity to learn, listen, and discuss in this safe setting. The conference will be filmed and put on our website after post-production editing, and if there's anybody who does not wish to have themselves filmed, I suggest that you don't ask too many questions. And the other part of that is that speakers who do not want to be filmed, we might film you, but we will not post you anywhere. I ask that people don't film personally without the permission of the speakers themselves, because this should be up to them. This conference would not be possible without the generosity and the collaboration of SOAS and the Department of History, Religion, and Philosophies through the fellow trustee, Dr. Erica Hunter, who is here today and will say a few words. And we also could not have done this conference without a rather esteemed steering committee of academics who have guided us through this process and will continue to do so through the chairing of the various panels and in their own discussions. Their deep scholarship and knowledge of the topic has been invaluable. Our particular thanks to them for all they have done and all they will do over the next 2.5 days. Today, the conference will open with a memory panel chaired by Avi Shlaim and moderated by Shohat, to be followed by the 2 days of the academic papers and discussions. BISI looks forward to welcoming you tonight at the British Academy at the reception there at 6:30. It's an easy half-hour walk or an easy tube line straight down the Piccadilly line to Piccadilly. I would urge you to, if you're hungry, to eat something before you come, because it's not a lavish reception. On a practical note, we ask that you wear your name tags throughout the conference, and in your packet you have bios and abstracts, which we ask that you not share. There are a variety of reasons for that. We've changed the program. A revised list of the bios and abstracts will be on our formal website, but one thing to say is that it would be better if you just make sure that those are kept to your own personal use. And also it means that the various chairs of the panels don't have to repeat the biographies of everybody who's speaking, so we have more time for their presentations. Erica will now say a few words of welcome on behalf of SOAS, and then Orit will speak on behalf of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Chicago, who are our two institutional collaborators on this conference. We hope you enjoy the memory panel and the conference and look forward to meeting you and engaging with many of you over the coming days. Thank you, and it's good to see you here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to see you here at SOAS and to welcome you on behalf of the Department of History, Religions and Philosophies. And when the idea was first mooted at the council meeting of BISI, I was, I think, quite prompt to volunteer that SOAS would be the ideal venue to hold such a conference. Why? The range of disciplines which we hold at SOAS and also in our department covers not only antiquarian concerns, and my colleague Professor Andrew George will say a few words at the end of mine on the Babylonian scholarship that he does in the department, but also SOAS is very engaged with modernities, modern questions and challenges. And one of the biggest challenges to communities today is displacement. We've seen in the papers in recent years through the activities of Daesh, the widespread displacement of the Yazidi and the Christian communities from northern Iraq and, of course, other sections of Iraqi society. So it is an ongoing phenomenon, unfortunately, that is taking place, and steps, of course, to try and stem the tide. Well, as you will all know, you've probably got even a better insight than me into the history. The displacement of the Jewish community from Iraq is, I think, one of the great tragedies, we might say, of Iraqi history. Iraq, which was the cradle right back in Sasanian and I'm sure in earlier times of a mosaic of different ethno-religious communities who coexisted in the land of Mesopotamia. And of course, the Jewish community have a very venerable history for 2,500 years. That displacement took place in the 1950s, and of course, as you will all know, there is merely a handful of the surviving community. However, that shouldn't stop us having hope to think about what the contributions of the community were, and they were very sizable, but also possibly exploring future options. In our Department of History, Religions and Philosophies, we cover everything from Jainism to Zoroastrianism to Eastern Christianity, which is my domain. I deal with the churches of Iraq and Syria and Iran, etc., and Judaism. And we deal with both the ancient and the modern aspects. So when this idea was mooted at the BISI Council, I could think of no finer place or more appropriate place to hold this conference than SOAS. And I do hope that at the end of the conference that you will agree with me, not just on the calibre of the papers, but on the venue and facilities and the intellectual interchange, that that was the appropriate decision. Now, I would like just to call for a few minutes my fellow colleague, very distinguished colleague, Professor Andrew George, to say a few words about just the ancient aspect of Jews in Mesopotamia, perhaps.
very few words, because I know you're itching to get on with your programme. When I received the programme, I think there was a typo in it. It said welcoming remarks would be at 2 o'clock, and that then the first session would also be at 2 o'clock, so I envisaged that I wouldn't be speaking for very long, and indeed I won't, because there's nothing more irritating than coming to a conference and then finding that the first half an hour is taken up by a succession of people from the university who then walk away without interest in what follows. I am interested in what is going on here today and tomorrow. I work as an Assyriologist in the studying the civilization of ancient Iraq, but of course, as you'll know, ancient Iraq and modern Iraq have many historical threads that connect them, and one of them, of course, up until very recently, was the presence of Jews in Iraq, and everyone knows that the Jews were taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar in 589 BC, and were so astonished, perhaps, by what they saw, that they clung together and formed their separate communities. Many people think that the exile in Babylonia is what, in fact, created the Jewish ethnic concept. So at SOAS, then, we have the study of the ancient world, surprisingly, because SOAS people think of as social science and international relations and modern studies generally. But there are just a few of us who precariously hang on at SOAS studying the ancient world, not only ancient Iraq, but also Zoroastrianism, also in the department which Erica and I inhabit. Ancient China, too, is present, and Sanskrit, naturally, also. But I won't keep you by telling you more about SOAS. You know enough. I think it's already been made apparent to you where you are, and the right people have come and said the right words. So I think now is probably the time at, yes, 1405, to get on with the memoirs, memories, and personal histories that intrigue us all.
Yes, hello, welcome. I represent here the third institution who was involved, which is the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago. So I'd like to start by thanking SOAS, especially the British Institute for Iraq, for all their help and for fundraising for this event, and my own centers, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago. We owe special thanks to Ali Khader, to Glenn Rangwala, and also to the steering committee, Daniel Lowe, Joseph Sassoon, Ella Shohat, Zvi Bendor, Avi Shlaim, and also I'd like to thank Sami Zubeida and David Bassoon who've been in touch with me. And I owe special thanks to Joan Porter, who's really a friend and a force of nature that made this conference coming. So let me tell you in a few words what led to this event and what we're planning for the next few days. This is an event that brings together the pioneers of the field. You might have heard their names, as I mentioned the name of the steering committee, but also a young generation of scholars. And we're particularly grateful to the fruits of our Iraqi colleagues, many of whom could not be there, a young generation of scholars who have been doing in recent years fantastic work on Iraqi Jews, the contribution of Jews to Iraqi literature, gender in Iraqi Jewish society, and their contribution to understanding Iraqi social history while they're not there is certainly something that we're thankful. Now, the idea behind the conference was to have a conference about the Jews of Iraq, not the Jews of Islam, not Oriental Jews, not the Jews of the Middle East, not the Jews of Iraq from comparative perspective, but about Jews who were a part and a vital part of Iraqi society and its culture. So we will be talking about the global and networks and connections between societies, and we will talk in the last panel about what was lost with migration, but it is the partial and incomplete and yet very hopeful reconstruction of the life of this community that we seek to explore in this conference. Now, we know that for many here, our presenters, but also our audience, just evoking the name of Iraq brings memories of joy, of nostalgia, of happiness. But we're also aware, as John noted, that for some it brings also pains of family members lost, of life that is no longer accessible, of family members who disappeared. And we want to thank you very much for being with us, given this complex situation, and for sharing with us whatever you wish to share about this particular history. In that context, we also want to thank the many members of the Iraqi community who in London who signed up for this conference, and also other Iraqis who came from elsewhere. And it is with conversations with you that we hope to reconstruct some of these contexts. Things that we might think are particularly Jewish, you can tell us, no, they're actually not necessarily Jewish. So this kind of back and forth is something that we're looking forward to. Now, many emails were exchanged regarding this conference, and it is our aim not to avoid what is sometimes deemed as controversial topics, from the history of the community in the 1950s to Mizrahi history in Israel to wherever Amba comes from. Apparently, that's a controversy too. We're happy about it, and we agree to disagree cordially. But I think it's important because Iraqi Jews, even in the 50s or in the 60s or in the 70s, were also not a unified voice. There were Iraqi patriots, some were communists, some were Zionists, some were pro-British, some were anti-British. They migrated to different places, and it is precisely this multiplicity of voices that we seek to capture. So I thank you very, very much for coming here. I thank all the presenters, the audience members, and I would like now to invite Ella Shohat and Avi Shlaim to head the memory panel.
Okay, hello everyone. Good evening or good afternoon. I'm still jet lagged, so I'm not sure exactly what's the time. I'm sure I'm in London, though. So thank you all for coming. It's truly, truly a pleasure. And I know for many of us, it is simply, truly a moving event to simply gather around the question of Iraqi Jews or Jews of Iraq, Jews from Iraq. Of course, each term brings with it its own controversial and approach or different perspective. But I'm personally am grateful to all the organizers who worked so hard to make this conference possible. I'm also delighted to be the moderator of this panel, despite the fact that this is largely an academic conference and the focus is more on analytical papers. We also thought that it would be a great idea, and Avi Shlaim was a key person here in conceiving this panel, thinking about memoirs and memory writing in conjunction with questions of historical writing, and that the two issues are not separated. Of course, any kind of memoir or memory writing brings with it a number of issues about what constructs a historical evidence, but memoirs are much more than simply a historical evidence. It is also about emotional spaces. It's also about complex family spaces, and it brings with it a number of other issues that tend to be sometimes marginalized. The panel itself, as we shall see, brings with it different writers or different people in terms of their historical perspective, in terms of their experience. Our first speaker on the panel will be Avi Shlaim, who actually we will avoid introductions to save time, as John already mentioned. And I would like to welcome Avi to the panel to start his